There's some scholarly debate about when, why, and where Bach's Gloria in excelsis Deo was first performed. Typically, while in Leipzig, Bach would compose a specific cantata for a feast day, and that would be performed at St. Thomas's Church after or sandwiched around the sermon. But that was a German text cantata. And this piece is in Latin, and in 18th century Lutheran church, that was just something that wasn't done, singing in Latin at that part in the service. There's another possibility that Bach maybe used this at the front of the service where the Gloria usually sits, but usually he would have paired it with an accompanying Kyrie that preceded it. Not to mention the fact that this isn't the full Gloria text. It's merely an allusion to the Christmas gospel that we just heard proclaimed. So, while it's not confirmed, there's some consensus that the inception of this piece probably went something like this. The Silesian War, the second of 3 Silesian Wars, had been raging since August of 1744. Prussian aggression was nothing new at these times, but this was the first time that war had come right to Bach's doorstep. Prussian troops entered Leipzig in November of 1745, locking down and occupying the whole city. Through Bach's own correspondence, we know this was a very difficult time for the citizens of Leipzig, with curfews and a lack of food and resources, and the constant fear of violence. And I can only imagine it was a much worse time for those in Leipzig that were less fortunate than Bach and his contemporaries. It was the same time of year. It was the season of Advent. And we can imagine an embattled Bach sitting at home by the hearth, worrying about his family, worrying about his community, about how long this war might stretch on, about what Christmas services might even look like in St. Thomas's Church this year, worrying as he stared into the fire nearly 279 years ago to the day. Just then, a friend or colleague bursts through the door with big news. Bach learns on that day, December 22nd, that a peace accord has been reached, and the treaty will be signed 3 days hence, on Christmas Day, with a special service at St. Paul's, the University Church in Leipzig. A great weight is lifted from Bach. His family is overjoyed that the war is ending, the occupation is ending. Oh, and by the way, the town council is going to have this special service right after the treaty is signed on Christmas Day. Could you whip something up for it, please? I imagine Bach being a little annoyed, but still probably used to those kinds of requests at this point. So he steals from himself. Bach quickly reworks Gloria movements from the Mass in B minor into a special offering to be performed at the University Church. So et in terra pax, and on earth peace, has real significance for this music. War is a grim reality we've always lived with, and it's hard to see a future path where it doesn't exist. Even St. Paul's, the Leipzig University Church where this message of peace was performed, after lasting and standing tall for more than 7 centuries, was destroyed by a bomb during the communist occupation of Leipzig. We are told through the scriptures, and also by Bach, that the incarnation of Jesus, the birthing of a baby boy, will bring us that path to peace. Peace among nations, peace in our communities and families, peace in our relationship with the earth. There was a father whose daughter was a budding violinist, and one day he gave her a violin that he'd been saving, storing away for a certain occasion. And he said, before you play it, I want you to go to these 3 places and have it appraised. So she did, and she came back. And her father asked, what did you learn? And she said, well, first I went to the pawn shop, and they said, it's a little scuffed, but they offered me $100 for it. And then I went to the musical instrument store, and they said, it plays well, but it's really old, so we'll give you $500 for it. Then I went to the auction house, And they said, this violin was built by a very rare and sought-after builder, and they offered me $50,000 for it. Do you want me to sell this violin? She asked her father. No, definitely not, he said. I simply wanted you to see that different places will value the gifts you bring in different ways. If your gifts are not valued, it only means you're in the wrong place. Do we value the gift that Bach is giving us in his music? This message he is sending to us? Do we value the miraculous gift of incarnation at Redeemer? Or are we distracted by pretty melodies and rich stories and all the surrounding festivities of Christmastide? The season of Advent is not just about waiting to celebrate the birth of a baby, but preparing ourselves and storing up our energies as we await the coming of Christ in us. Not just alive, but truly living through our own actions in our communities. The miracle at hand is not the fact that God came down as a little baby with animals and shepherds and wise folk and a big star, but that God came at all. It strikes me that often we think of war as an active state that we move ourselves in and out of. Yet peace seems to be often thought of as a static state, outside of temporal restrictions. Bach knew this wasn't the case. We just heard him preaching to us when glory to God in the highest changed to et in terra pax, and on earth peace. We heard it in the violin. And we heard it in the voice. It's an upward battle, a step forward and a step back. Slow but unrelenting progress. Peace is an active process that can falter at any moment. It is dependent on all our actions, not through acts of aggression or defense, but through acts of vulnerability and contrition. Can we hear that Christ is calling us to stop warring against nation states, but also against people, against ideas? If we are not at war with those who suffer with addiction, then why do we treat safe injection sites like battlements to be destroyed? If we are not at war with victims of abuse, especially those who live in poverty, then why can we not name intimate partner violence as an epidemic to aid in more funding and support for those victims? If we are not at war with refugees, with immigrants, with international students, then why do we name them as the reason for a housing crisis or inflation or crime? The message that I hear in tonight's music is, let us work towards peace that is lasting, not just in the world, but especially in our communities and in our relationships. Let us welcome the incarnation in our hearts and strive to recognize it in others. In a few moments at the end of this music, you'll hear 7 bars of music that close out the work. 7 bars where the first trumpet spits out a hopeful message of peace, calling us back to that same motive when the work began. When the music ends, and when Advent is over, what will our next 7 bars sound like? How will incarnation affect change in us and in our community? Bach is asking if we are ready for the work that comes with et in terra pax.